Hey everybody, welcome to the Hamakua Homestead. If you're new here, my name is Tiffany and today we are making bread. Now, I am not a bread eater, I don't go for the carbs, but my family sure does. So we are going to try to whip up a artesian bread recipe. I got this off of sallysbakingaddiction.com. I will link that down below. I did use this recipe once before. I did not follow the instructions on how long to let it rise and the second rise, and it still turned out really good, but we are going to go ahead and see what we can do to make an even better loaf today. This recipe only takes 4 ingredients: salt, flour, water, and yeast. However, just because of all the research that I've been doing on different bread recipes, I am going to feed the yeast with sugar. So I guess it has 5 ingredients. So we're gonna go ahead and get started. First thing we're gonna do is activate our yeast. I'm going to put our water and yeast into a bowl together so that it can start doing yeast things. I suppose I don't need to waste a bowl. I can just use my measuring cup. So I have a cup and a half of a little bit more than room temperature water. It's not cold, but it's also not very warm. To that we are going to add 2 teaspoons of dried instant yeast. Now you guys know that I am not very good at following measurements. I always just add more ingredients of what I think that I'll like. But when you're baking bread or baking in general, it's a lot more important to stay to the recipe. However, I do want to feed our yeast a little bit of sugar, so I'm just gonna do that. That's the only alteration. That's 1 tablespoon of organic white sugar. So I'm just gonna go ahead and give it a quick stir. And set this aside. And I will show you what it looks like in a few minutes. But while that is happening, we'll go ahead and measure out our flour and salt in a separate container. We're going to measure out 3 1/4 cup flour. A tip that I have learned recently, as I have been trying to figure out how to make bread, is that you don't want to just scoop it out of the bag and pack it into the measuring container. You want to spoon it in so it's just like that. You don't want to pack it in because then you're going to end up with too much flour according to what the recipe expects you to do. If that makes sense. Right, that's 3 1/4 cups of flour. I'm going to keep the flour out in case we need it later. And 2 teaspoons coarse salt. We don't want to put the salt directly in with the yeast, which is a major reason why we're doing it separately, because if you have the salt directly touching the yeast, it could possibly kill the yeast. Just mix together the salt and the flour. All right, so our yeast is foaming. See how it has spread out, it has expanded, it is foamy all over the whole top of it, and there's little pockets in there too. So I'm gonna go ahead and call that good and mix this in. I wanna get all that yeast and sugar out from the bottom. Now for this particular recipe, it does call for just using a wooden spoon or spatula to mix it together. And it is going to become a very sticky dough. Okay, I'm gonna have to go in with my hands. Make it so you guys can see a little bit. I'm just trying to make sure that all of the flour gets incorporated in with the moisture. I think I am satisfied with that. It is definitely a very sticky dough. I'm going to wash it off with some flour. Just a little teeny bit. Okay, so I'm just gonna go ahead and form it into a ball-like shape. which is easier said than done. It's very, very shaggy and sticky. All right, that's all we need to do. I'm just gonna go ahead and put a piece of saran wrap on top of here, and I'm going to let it rise. Most recipes that I've been playing with call for a rise time of about an hour or until the dough has doubled in size. It's gonna inflate. This one says 2 to 3 hours. I'm not sure what's gonna happen, but I know it's at least gonna be an hour. I'll keep you posted. It has been a little bit over 2 hours, about 2 hours and 15 minutes, and we're gonna go ahead and move on to the next step. According to the recipe on this particular website, we are going to further let this rise. It had more than doubled in size over this time period. It actually probably got close to 3 times the size. Let me show you what it looks like. It has a lot of bubbles in it. It has been very, very active, and it is still very, very sticky. So what it is recommended for this, we are going to go ahead and cover it up again, put it in the refrigerator, which is it bubbling? I've heard of that being done with different sourdough starters and things like that, but this is my first time trying any kind of bread like that. So what the recipe says to do is go ahead and just cover this up, put it in the refrigerator, let it continue to rise and bubble, almost like it's gonna be fermenting kind of, for at least 12 hours for best taste and texture. So I work tomorrow, so it'll be closer to 18 to 24 hours that it will be in the refrigerator. It says to do it up to 3 days. So I'll bring you guys along tomorrow and show you what our experiment looks like. All right, you guys, and we are back. It has been just under 24 hours since we put our dough into the refrigerator. So let's take a look at what it looks like. I'm just as curious as you are. There are lots and lots of bubbles in here. I'm not sure if it's coming through on the camera. Smells really good. All right, so the next step we're gonna do, we are going to turn this out onto a lightly floured surface and form it into a ball. Good. It's very cold, but it's not very sticky like I was imagining that it would be. We have our ball. Now we are going to put it onto our parchment paper. The instructions say to cut 3 lines in it. Okay. Now we're gonna go ahead and lift this up and put it inside of a bowl. It says to do that so that it doesn't spread out so much while we are letting it sit at room temperature for the next 45 minutes. I probably need a bigger bowl than that. Guys, so now we're just gonna go ahead and let this set out at room temperature for 45 minutes. And in the meantime, I'm going to preheat our Dutch oven. I have not baked bread in a Dutch oven before, except for one time recently. I did a test run. I did not use parchment paper, and it turned out to be quite a disaster. So we are giving it a second go. This is a new pot. It was on clearance, so I had to get it. I was too excited. So we're gonna go ahead and stick this in the oven and preheat while that is continuing to rise. All right, it has been 45 minutes. Our Dutch oven is preheated in the 475-degree oven, and our bread has started to warm up to room temperature. It has risen a little bit. Looks pretty. So now we're gonna go ahead and transfer our bread dough into our hot, hot, hot Dutch oven. Okay, that was very, very easy. Now we're gonna pop the lid back on. And put it into the oven. And I did put in a pot of hot water into the oven. It doesn't say to do that necessarily in this recipe, but I've seen in other recipes, even off of this website, that helps make for a crispier outer crust. Now that the bread is in the oven, we gotta set our timer. It says 20 to 25 minutes, so I'm doing, the ladybug, so I'm doing 23 minutes, and then I'm gonna go ahead and check on it then. Time's up, let's open up the oven.
That's gorgeous.
Okay, so now the next step in the instructions, according to Sally, is to put it back in the oven for another 8 to 10 minutes without the lid. Okay, so that was a lot longer than 8 to 10 minutes. It was closer to 20 minutes, but it is out of the oven. We're going to let it rest for 5 minutes. See if I can show you. I do have to say that does look pretty. I love it. So we're gonna go ahead and let it rest for 5 minutes before we cut in and see what the insides look like. All right, here's for the moment of truth. We're gonna go ahead and cut into our loaf. It is definitely not as airy and fluffy as I was expecting it to be, but it still looks good and it still smells good, so we'll call it a win. My son is doing a taste test off camera right now. I'll let you know what he says. All right, so the man behind the camera says that it's good, but the outside is a little bit crunchy for his particular taste. So we're just gonna go ahead and keep trying and keep making bread. Thank you so much for joining us today on the Hamakua Homestead. I'll see you again soon.